the list that changed the war. Yesterday, Iran published a list, not a list of military bases, not radar installations, not oil fields, naval vessels, or missile defense systems. Those have been targets since day one. Everybody expected those. Yesterday's list was different. Yesterday's list contained 6 names that have never appeared on a military target list in the history of modern warfare. 6 names that collectively represent more economic value than the GDP of most countries on Earth. 6 names that almost every person watching this right now has interacted with today. Google, Microsoft, Nvidia, IBM, Oracle, Palantir. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps published a formal declaration that every office and data center is now a legitimate target. And then they did something that has never happened before in modern warfare. They warned civilians to leave. They told ordinary civilians, people living and working in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Manama, and Tel Aviv, not to stand within 1 kilometer of any bank, 1 kilometer from a bank, because the bank might be hit by a missile. That warning was issued on March 11th, 2026, day 12 of a war that was supposed to be a short-term operation. Today is day 13. And the question every government, investor, and ordinary person with money in a Gulf bank account is asking this morning is the same. Is this real? You don't look at what Iran threatened. You don't look at what they announced. You look at what they already did. Because the threat published yesterday is not the beginning. It is Chapter 2. Chapter 1 happened 11 days ago on the first morning of this war. On March 1st, 2026, while the world was still processing the news of open conflict, Iran launched drones at a building, not a military base, a data center. 3 Amazon Web Services facilities located in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. The cloud infrastructure backbone that powers banking systems, payment processors, and enterprise software across the Gulf region. 2 facilities were directly struck. The 3rd was damaged. Fire suppression systems activated. Server rooms flooded with water to stop the blaze. Within hours, something extraordinary happened. The Gulf's largest ride-sharing and delivery platform went offline. Banking systems began reporting outages. Digital wallets stopped processing transactions. Enterprise software across the region lost connectivity. Not because of a cyber attack, because a drone had physically set fire to the building where the servers lived. And in that moment, the nature of modern warfare changed. A hyperscale cloud provider had been attacked in a live military conflict. Iran demonstrated that the digital backbone of the global economy could be treated like any other piece of battlefield infrastructure. That was the proof of concept. Yesterday's list is what comes next. On the morning of March 1st, 2026, something happened that most people outside the technology industry did not immediately understand. A drone struck a building, not a command bunker, not a radar station, a data center. The target was part of Amazon Web Services' Gulf cloud infrastructure, facilities quietly operating in the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. To most people driving past those buildings, they look like warehouses. Windowless concrete boxes with heavy security and enormous cooling systems humming constantly. But inside those buildings lives something far more important than hardware. Inside them lives the digital infrastructure of an entire region. Banks run their transaction systems there. Delivery platforms process orders there. Airlines manage booking systems there. Investment firms execute trades there. Every time a ride is booked, a payment is processed, or a package is tracked, the information travels through servers sitting inside buildings like those. When the drone struck, the physical damage triggered automatic safety systems. Fire suppression systems activated immediately. Inside a data center, those systems don't spray ordinary water. They release massive volumes designed to stop electrical fires from spreading. The fires were contained, but the damage was already done. Electrical systems were disrupted, power distribution failed, network routing collapsed. Across the Gulf region, digital services began going dark. Within hours, Careem, the region's largest ride-sharing and delivery platform used by tens of millions of people, stopped functioning. Major banks including Emirates NBD, First Abu Dhabi Bank, and Abu Dhabi Commercial Bank experienced service disruptions. To the average customer opening their phone that day, it looked like a routine outage, an app not loading, a payment failing. But behind the scenes, something far more significant had happened. A military strike had just physically disrupted the cloud infrastructure that powers a modern economy. The Uptime Institute summarized the event with a single sentence. This was the first confirmed military attack on a hyperscale cloud provider in history. Think about what that means. For decades, wars targeted oil pipelines and power plants, but the modern world runs on something new: servers, data, the invisible digital architecture that allows financial systems, logistics networks, and government services to operate. Iran did not wait for the war to escalate before testing that reality. They did it on the opening morning, before oil crossed $100 a barrel, before the Strait of Hormuz closed, before markets even understood what kind of conflict they were watching. Iran looked directly at the digital infrastructure supporting the global economy, and they proved that it could burn just like anything else. Why Iran targeted tech instead of tanks. At first glance, the decision to target technology companies seems strange. Wars are usually fought against tanks, airfields, and missile bases. Those are the obvious targets. Destroy the enemy's military equipment, and the war becomes easier to win. But Iran's strategy is built around a different calculation, because in 2026, the most important infrastructure behind American military power is no longer just steel and fuel. It is data. The modern battlefield runs on digital systems. Satellite imagery is processed by artificial intelligence. Missile launchers are identified through machine learning models scanning terrain in real time. Logistics networks track equipment across continents using cloud computing. And intelligence analysis that once took weeks is now completed in minutes by software running on massive server farms. Which means the war machine of a modern superpower depends on something that didn't exist 20 years ago: commercial technology infrastructure. That is why Iran is not just targeting aircraft and missile batteries. It is targeting the companies that power the systems behind those weapons. And the evidence of that strategy appeared on the first day of the war. When Iranian drones struck Amazon Web Services data centers in the UAE and Bahrain, the physical damage triggered massive outages. This disrupted financial services, ride-sharing platforms, and banking applications across the Gulf region. It was the first known time in modern warfare that a hyperscale cloud provider had been directly attacked. That strike wasn't about destroying servers for tactical advantage. It was about demonstrating something much larger: that the infrastructure supporting the digital economy and the military systems tied to it is physically vulnerable. Experts noted that data centers have become strategic assets, comparable to energy infrastructure or military bases, because they support financial networks, communications, and intelligence operations simultaneously. In other words, the battlefield has expanded. Instead of fighting only at the front lines, Iran is applying pressure directly to the technological systems behind American power. And this creates a brutal asymmetry. Destroying a tank weakens an army. But disrupting a technology network can weaken an entire economy. Banking systems slow down, digital payments fail, transportation platforms stop functioning, and the perception of instability spreads instantly through financial markets. That is the real reason Iran targeted technology instead of tanks, because tanks influence battles. But technology infrastructure influences everything else. And in the 21st century, wars are no longer fought only on battlefields. They are fought inside power grids, fiber optic cables, and server rooms. The military infrastructure hidden inside Silicon Valley. To understand why Iran placed companies like Google, Microsoft, Nvidia, IBM, Oracle, and Palantir on a military target list, you have to understand something that most people outside the defense world never see. These companies are not just technology firms. They are part of the operational infrastructure of modern military power. 20 years ago, the backbone of a military campaign was steel: aircraft carriers, armored divisions, missile batteries, and fuel depots. In 2026, the backbone of military power is increasingly computational: data, cloud networks, artificial intelligence, massive server clusters processing information faster than any human command center ever could. And much of that infrastructure does not belong to governments. It belongs to Silicon Valley. Microsoft, for example, holds some of the most important cloud computing contracts inside the US defense system. Through its Azure cloud platform, Microsoft provides computing environments capable of handling classified military workloads: logistics coordination, battlefield communication systems, intelligence processing, and real-time operational planning. When American commanders coordinate military operations, significant portions of the digital infrastructure run on servers built by Microsoft. Google's cloud division has also developed advanced artificial intelligence tools that support defense intelligence analysis. These systems process enormous volumes of data: satellite imagery, sensor feeds, signals intelligence, and transform information into actionable insight. Instead of analysts spending days reviewing photographs, AI systems now scan images in seconds, identifying missile launch sites or vehicle movements. Nvidia's role is even more fundamental. The company's semiconductor chips power many of the AI systems used in advanced computing environments. These processors handle the heavy mathematical workloads required to train machine learning models and run the algorithms that guide modern intelligence systems. Without those chips, many advanced AI applications simply cannot function. Palantir operates in a different but equally strategic space. Its data analysis platforms are widely used by defense agencies to combine information. Those platforms help analysts identify patterns, track potential threats, and coordinate targeting decisions. IBM and Oracle, meanwhile, maintain long-standing roles providing enterprise computing infrastructure for government agencies and military logistics systems. Taken together, these companies form something that did not exist in previous generations of warfare: a commercial technology ecosystem deeply embedded inside the national security architecture of a superpower. From Iran's perspective, that creates a legal and strategic argument. If commercial technology infrastructure directly enables military targeting and coordination, then those systems are no longer purely civilian. they become part of the war machine itself. That argument is already sparking intense debate among international law experts, because if it becomes widely accepted, the definition of a military target expands dramatically, not just to bases and weapons, but to the server rooms and offices where the digital systems behind modern warfare are built. And that shift would change the rules of conflict in ways the world has never faced before. The Pax Silica strategy that just collapsed? 6 weeks before this war began, Washington announced something that most people outside the technology and policy world barely noticed, a program called Pax Silica. On paper, it looked like a technology partnership. In reality, it was a strategic blueprint for the next phase of global power. The idea behind Pax Silica was simple. For decades, the United States built its influence in the Middle East around energy security. Oil pipelines, naval patrols, and political alliances ensured that the world's most important energy region remained tied to American power. But the world is changing. Energy is still critical, but the next strategic resource is computing power, artificial intelligence, advanced semiconductors, massive data centers capable of training the algorithms that will shape military, economic, and political power. Pax Silica was designed to secure that future. Under the plan, the U.S. partnered with countries like the UAE and Qatar. The Gulf had 3 advantages that made it attractive for this role. First, enormous capital. Sovereign wealth funds in the region controlled trillions of dollars, capable of funding the most expensive computing infrastructure on Earth. Second, energy. AI data centers consume vast amounts of electricity, and the Gulf has access to some of the cheapest energy resources. Third, geography. Positioned between Europe, Asia, and Africa, the Gulf could become a global hub for digital infrastructure. The goal was not just economic development, it was strategic containment. American officials were concerned about China's rapid progress. By anchoring American chips and AI platforms inside the Gulf, Washington hoped to create an ecosystem aligned with Western standards. It was, in effect, a digital version of the old security architecture. Instead of tankers, the assets were server farms. But the entire framework rested on one foundational assumption: that the Gulf would remain a safe environment for technology infrastructure. The security plans were detailed. Tracking systems ensured advanced processors were not diverted to Chinese companies, but those plans focused almost entirely on one risk: China. What they did not plan for was something far more immediate: missiles, drones, and a regional war where the buildings housing that technology become military targets. 11 days ago, Iranian drones struck Amazon Web Services infrastructure in the UAE. Yesterday, the IRGC published a list naming 5 additional American technology companies as future targets. In that moment, the foundational assumption behind Pax Silica, the Gulf infrastructure would remain secure, was shattered. Because if data centers can burn the same way oil refineries do, the strategic architecture built around them begins to collapse. Not slowly, but all at once. Why data centers are impossible to defend. Once Iran demonstrated that a data center could be struck with a drone, a question immediately began circulating. The question circulated inside security briefings, corporate boardrooms, and government war rooms. Can these facilities actually be protected? At first glance, the answer should be yes. Modern militaries possess advanced air defense systems. Patriot batteries can intercept missiles. Radar networks can track incoming aircraft. Electronic warfare systems can disrupt certain drones. In theory, a critical facility can be shielded. In practice, defending a data center against a sustained drone campaign is far more complicated. Data centers were never designed to be military installations. They are built for efficiency, connectivity, and cooling, not for surviving battlefield conditions. Most hyperscale facilities are large, static structures. They sit in open industrial districts where power lines, fiber cables, and cooling infrastructure are easily visible. Their locations are not secret. In fact, their addresses are often published openly in planning documents, investment reports, and government technology initiatives. For companies operating in the Gulf, these facilities were built on the assumption that they would function as commercial infrastructure inside a stable environment. But once conflict enters the picture, their visibility becomes a vulnerability. A drone does not need to destroy an entire facility to create disruption. A strike against power distribution equipment can force an emergency shutdown. Damage to cooling systems can trigger automatic server shutdowns. Even near-miss explosions can cause cascading failures by disrupting electrical infrastructure or severing fiber connections. And defending against those threats is extremely expensive. A single Patriot interceptor missile can cost several $millions. A military drone capable of reaching its target might cost only tens of thousands. This creates what analysts call offense-defense asymmetry. The attacker spends very little. The defender spends vastly more. This dynamic makes the economics of defense unsustainable over weeks of conflict. Protecting a single hyperscale campus requires radar coverage, interceptor missiles, command systems, and trained personnel operating continuously. Yet even that layered defense cannot guarantee perfect protection. The attacker only needs one drone to reach the target. The defender must stop every single one. In a war where missile defense inventories are under strain, resources cannot be concentrated everywhere. Which means technology companies now face a reality they were never meant to navigate. Their infrastructure sits where military conflict can reach it. Governments cannot promise to defend every server room, office tower, and fiber node that modern digital economies depend on. That vulnerability is what makes the IRGC's target list so powerful. It forces a question that has no easy answer. How do you defend the digital backbone of a global economy when the battlefield has expanded to include the buildings where it lives? The market panic that hasn't started yet. Right now, financial markets are behaving as if the AWS strikes were an isolated event. One data center hit, temporary outages, traffic rerouted to other regions, services restored within days. From the perspective of market models, the incident looks contained. Contained incidents are something markets understand. They get priced in quickly, a short-term shock, a temporary risk premium, and then trading continues as normal. But that assumption rests on one condition, that the attack was isolated. Yesterday's IRGC list made it clear that assumption is wrong, because if the first strike was a proof of concept, the list is the expansion. And the moment investors fully understand that shift, the reaction will not be gradual. It will be immediate. Financial markets move at the speed of algorithms. Large institutional funds do not wait for missiles to hit buildings before adjusting risk exposure. They react to probabilities. If a Google office in Dubai or a Microsoft data center in Abu Dhabi appears on a target list, portfolio managers do not wait to see whether the building is actually struck. They ask a simpler question: what is the risk-adjusted return? If the answer becomes uncertain, capital moves. And when capital moves quickly, markets move violently. Technology companies are particularly sensitive to geopolitical risk because their valuations depend heavily on long-term growth assumptions. If investors believe that data centers across the Gulf could become military targets, those assumptions change overnight. Not because the companies lost their technology, but because the infrastructure supporting that technology has become unstable. A single confirmed strike on a major tech campus would trigger a synchronized reassessment, something markets rarely experience outside of financial crises. Technology stocks, Gulf investment funds, regional banking exposure, all of it repriced simultaneously. The impact would extend far beyond the companies. Pension funds in North America, sovereign wealth funds in Asia, investment portfolios in Europe, trillions of dollars tied to technology equities would begin recalculating risk in real time. And that process does not unfold slowly. It unfolds in milliseconds. Because modern trading systems are automated, algorithms scan headlines, detect new geopolitical developments, and execute trades instantly. By the time most people read the news about a strike, the market reaction has already happened. The real danger is not the destruction of a building. It is the moment when investors realize buildings have become part of the battlefield. And when that realization spreads, the panic will not wait for confirmation. It will start the moment the probability becomes believable. The China message hidden inside Iran's target list. There's another layer to Iran's target list that has nothing to do with missiles, drones, or cloud infrastructure. It is a geopolitical message. Look carefully at the companies that appeared on the IRGC list: Google, Microsoft, Nvidia, IBM, Oracle, Palantir. Every one of them is an American technology company deeply embedded inside the U.S. national security architecture. Now look at the companies that did not appear: Huawei, Alibaba Cloud, Tencent Infrastructure, Chinese AI firms operating quietly across the Gulf. None of them were mentioned. That omission is not accidental. It is strategic signaling. Iran is telling governments, investors, and technology companies something very simple. American infrastructure in this region is now part of the battlefield. Chinese infrastructure is not. And that message is already showing up in unexpected places. Shipping traffic moving through the Strait of Hormuz has begun broadcasting something unusual in its tracking signals. Ships declaring themselves China-linked or indicating Chinese ownership while passing through the Gulf. Why? Because vessels associated with China are generally seen as less likely to be targeted during the conflict due to Beijing's more neutral stance. Think about what that means in strategic terms. In the middle of a war where Western infrastructure is being placed on target lists, companies and shipping operators are signaling Chinese connections as a form of protection. That is an extraordinary shift. For decades, the United States was the country whose presence guaranteed security in the Gulf. American alliances protected shipping lanes. Now, for the first time in a generation, the perception of safety is moving in a different direction, toward China. Iran's message is not just directed at Washington. It is directed at every government and investor watching this war unfold. If your infrastructure is aligned with the United States, it may become a military target. If it is aligned with China, it may not. That message lands especially loudly in the Gulf, because the governments there have spent the last decade carefully balancing between Washington and Beijing. Now those governments are watching American infrastructure appear on a military target list while Chinese-linked shipping moves cautiously through the strait. No official statement is required. The geometry of the situation speaks for itself. And when investors begin choosing where to build the next generation of data centers, they will remember which systems became targets and which ones did not. The strategic failure nobody modeled? When Washington planned this operation, the model looked familiar. Military pressure would degrade Iran's capabilities. Key facilities would be destroyed. Missile infrastructure would be weakened. Over time, the cost of continued resistance would rise high enough. Iran would either negotiate or collapse internally. This was the strategic logic behind nearly every modern intervention. Apply overwhelming force, control escalation, force the adversary to absorb losses until the political cost becomes unbearable. But there was one variable that the architects of this strategy appear to have underestimated. Iran was not planning to fight the war only on the battlefield. It was planning to fight it inside the global economy itself. And that changes the mathematics of conflict completely. Because traditional warfare destroys physical assets, economic warfare attacks confidence, oil infrastructure, shipping routes, financial systems, cloud computing facilities. The targets Iran selected are not random. They are pressure points inside the systems that keep modern economies functioning. A missile striking an oil pipeline raises energy prices. A drone hitting a data center disrupts digital infrastructure. A threat against banking networks creates uncertainty in financial markets. Each action produces effects far beyond the immediate damage. And those effects ripple outward through the global system. This is what makes the current situation so difficult for policymakers. Every defensive move becomes more expensive than the offensive action that triggered it. Protecting oil facilities requires naval patrols, missile defense systems, and constant surveillance. Protecting data centers requires air defense networks designed for military installations. Protecting shipping lanes requires fleets capable of monitoring thousands of miles of open water. Meanwhile, the cost of the attack itself can remain relatively small. A drone, costing tens of thousands of dollars, can force the deployment of defensive systems worth millions. When that imbalance continues long enough, the economic burden begins to accumulate. That is the asymmetry Iran appears to be exploiting. It does not need to win a traditional military victory. It only needs to create enough disruption across energy markets and technology infrastructure that the economic consequences become politically unsustainable. Because when voters begin feeling the effects, higher fuel prices, unstable financial markets, the pressure shifts from the battlefield to the political arena. And wars rarely end because one side runs out of weapons. They end because one side runs out of economic tolerance. The strategic failure in Washington's planning may not have been military. It may have been assuming the battlefield would remain limited. Instead, the battlefield expanded into the systems that run the global economy. Controlling escalation becomes far more complicated than originally expected. The question, Washington cannot answer. 13 days. That is how long this war had been running when the IRGC published the list. 13 days was enough time for oil markets to surge, for shipping routes through the Strait of Hormuz to become uncertain, and for the first hyperscale cloud infrastructure in history to be struck by a military drone. 13 days was enough time for something even more important. The battlefield expanded. What began as a conventional military confrontation is now touching the infrastructure that powers the modern economy. Oil, shipping, cloud computing, financial networks, and the companies that operate them. That expansion creates a question sitting quietly inside every strategic meeting room in Washington right now, a question that does not have an easy answer. Can the United States actually defend the commercial infrastructure that supports its economic and technological power across the Gulf? Not rhetorically, practically. Right now, can American air defense systems protect every cloud campus, every financial district, every technology headquarters operating in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Manama, and Tel Aviv? Because the buildings housing that infrastructure are not hidden. They are not underground. They are visible, fixed, and easily identifiable on a map. And the people who published the target list yesterday have already demonstrated that they know how to find a building and how to hit it. That is the uncomfortable reality of the modern battlefield. The world's most advanced economies now depend on infrastructure that was never designed to survive a war. Data centers, office towers, financial networks, fiber cables. For decades, the assumption was that wars would remain far away from those systems. Now, that assumption is being tested in real time, and the outcome will shape how governments, investors, and technology companies think about security. Because if the digital backbone of the global economy can become a battlefield, then the rules of conflict have changed in ways no strategist fully modeled. The question is no longer simply how wars are fought. The question is how economies survive them. And somewhere in Dubai right now, inside a glass tower whose address is easy to find on a map, people are sitting at their desks working. The question is not whether the technology exists to strike those buildings. We already know it does. The real question is whether the world is prepared. If this breakdown helped you understand what is really happening beneath the headlines, make sure you hit the like button. Videos like this often get buried by the algorithm, and your support helps push deeper analysis back into the conversation. Subscribe to the channel if you want more geopolitical and economic breakdowns. Drop a comment below because I want to hear your perspective. What do you think happens if this war moves further into the economic infrastructure of the global system? The answer might define the next decade.